On the subject of trying to save this poor forsaken island, perhaps that is what the people of Epping Forest are trying to do by all getting together outside the Bell Hotel and saying enough is enough after there have been accusations of one particular resident of that hotel 8 days after entering the country up in front of the courts for attempting allegedly to kiss a 14-year-old girl, something that he has denied. And the local men have said, we're not going to put up with this anymore. They shouldn't be here. This hotel's too close to the school. We're not being listened to. We've got no recourse to our politicians, so we're going to turn up and we are going to protest. And of course, the far left turned up and things are starting to get a little hot under the collar. Meanwhile, we learn about what's going on with this debacle, for want of a better phrase. There's far stronger words that I feel like I'd like to use to describe this ridiculous situation where we may now see up to 100,000 Afghans coming to live in the UK, many of whom are unvetted. The Telegraph seem to think only 1 in 16 may actually have a technical right to apply for refuge in the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, our friends, the immigration lawyers, are there seeking to use the ECHR to force us to accept thousands more. The situation's only going to get worse, and we learn that hundreds of asylum seekers living in these hotels at our expense. You're paying for it, I'm paying for it. Our little girl's safety, they're paying for it as well in their own way. We've learned, this is court records. Court records. So these aren't allegations. This is the stuff that's made it to court, which is the tip of the iceberg. That 1 in 100 of these people in these hotels, 1 in 100, have been hauled before magistrates. We're getting more than 1 in 100 coming over in the blimmin' boats. And they're not being hauled before magistrates because they threw their documents into the wash. No, they're being hauled before magistrates because they're committing crimes such as rape, robbery and GBH. I just don't know how we go on from here. Let's speak to Guy Campier, who is Senior Researcher on Nationhood at the Prosperity Institute. Guy, thank you so much for coming onto the programme.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Yes, great to have you. Senior researcher on nationhood. I want to dig into that, because what is nationhood these days when you've got anybody from any country turning up and saying, I want to live in Britain. Apparently we treat them better than we treat our own. They don't seem to want to integrate. They don't assimilate. This idea that magically, if you've been brought up in the Middle East or North Africa, you can land in Dover and suddenly go, oh, I've seen the light. I'm a Christian. I'm a Westerner now. To me is for the birds. So how do we maintain a sense of nationhood when we've got this massive influx of people from other cultures?
I think you have to say that we can't have a massive influx like this. I mean, even if you assume that all these people have, with the best will in the world, want to become British, the numbers are so high that in a lot of places, it's foreigners living next to foreigners living next to foreigners. Who are they going to learn to be British from?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I get this, but when politicians are all saying the same thing, well, not all politicians, but a lot of people are saying, look, we've got a problem. We can't have the numbers anymore. It's not sustainable. Those who are here have to integrate. And I'm like, OK, this is fine. We know we can't have the numbers anymore. Labour Party ain't going to do bip about that, are they? But we've already got a load of people here living in hotels, being put into private accommodation, who are treating our girls like rubbish, who are committing crimes, who don't speak the language, who don't like us, who don't respect our culture, cannot suddenly have some sort of magic Men in Black pen put in front of their eyes so they forget where they've come from and suddenly morph into British citizens with all of our sort of 2,000 years worth of Judeo-Christian heritage. It ain't going to happen. It's for the birds. So what I want to know is, we've already got the problem. It's here. We're the 11th hour. There are people with placards outside a hotel in Epping. We've got to do something about the situation now, not just prevent it getting worse, but now. And I want to know what that is. What can we do?
Well, it's a tricky one. If the government wants to, the reason why we have this asylum system in crisis is because of their commitment to human rights law. Human rights law that is putting the human rights of asylum seekers, who in many cases are fakes and frauds, above the rights of British people. And that's what's leading to these horrible scenes that we're seeing. So the asylum system has to be reformed, and that's going to mean leaving the ECHR. It's going to mean repealing the Human Rights Act in the UK. It's going to mean stripping out an awful lot of the human rights law that people like Sir Keir Starmer and many of his lawyer friends have been putting into our law for 30 years at this point. It's going to be a huge project, but we need to do it.
OK, again, I'm going to go back to work, because the question I'm really trying to get answered, because I don't have the answer. I'm not saying you have to, because I'm not sure anybody's got the blimmin' answer. We can get rid of the ECHR. We can up uproot and unearth all of that human rights legislation, chuck it into the dustbin of history. We can turn off the tap and say enough is enough, no more in. And those who actually commit crimes and get charged must be deported somehow. We're going to have returns agreements with some pretty shady entities, but there you have it. What I want to know is, even if all of that happens, Kassam from Kabul doesn't suddenly think a 14-year-old girl with a short skirt who thinks she's a Kardashian because that's what she's been bombarded with on Instagram is actually someone who deserves our respect and shouldn't be harassed at the school gate. It doesn't change that. How do we deal with that element of all of this? Because I want to know that as a woman. I want to know that on behalf of all the women listening to this, of all the fathers with daughters, the brothers with sisters. How do we make sure these men who have come from countries who have completely different views of women and the freedoms of women, how we make sure that they don't go about harassing our girls?
It's a great question, and I'm a father of daughters. It's something that concerns me as well. I think the answer is you don't let them in the first place. If you've got them in the country already, if they're an asylum seeker, we should be going through these asylum records, including the ones who've been given asylum over the last few years, and we should be saying, is your case really genuine? And the ones that aren't, we should be kicking them out. And then for the ones that are still here, and who have a right to be here, for whom it's more difficult, we very simply have to have the police act so that when they do something bad, they are going to jail and they will get the lesson that it's not acceptable.
But then there's a fine line, isn't there? You know, if you know, with these sort of cases, as a woman myself who feels so deeply uncomfortable, I'm 41 years old, I've got a thick skin, I've actually lived in the developing world a lot. So, you know, I'm used to having to sort of adapt my own behaviours for the context in which I'm living. I wouldn't expect to have to do that in West London, but I seem to have to these days. And I can tell you this, I actually have to think about what I'm wearing. If I walk from the tube home with all my telly makeup on, I know I'm going to get the leers and the hisses and the stares and the trailers and all the men who make me feel really quite uncomfortable in the 3-minute walk between that tube station and my door. I'm looking in shop windows as I pass them to see if there's a shadowy figure behind me, that I'm aware of footsteps, and I'm turning my head around to see if someone's come down the street. It makes me feel extremely uncomfortable in my own skin, and so I'm getting out. That's the sort of stuff I want to see stop. But the problem is that isn't necessarily a crime. To follow someone like this with your eyes down the street or walk behind them or go tss, 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 tss. You know, there's not a police force in the world. If you said this man gave me a funny look and he's got a funny little Afghan hat on, you're probably going to be accused of being a racist. But that's the stuff we need to tackle.
Well, I'm sorry to hear it happens. I agree. We have these lower level cultural issues that don't necessarily reach the level of being a crime, but are nonetheless deeply unpleasant and deeply horrible. I think the way you deal with that is that the people who are doing this are, shall we say, not people who are going to be bankers and engineers and everything else. They shouldn't be let in the country in the first place. The ones that are here, quite often, won't necessarily be British citizens, and they should be sent home if they are no longer conducive to the public good. Some of them will have indefinite leave to remain or a similar status. But if we find that they are engaging in this kind of behaviour, then we should look at these cases again. And we should say, you're not someone who's a good fit for this country. We're very sorry, but you should go home. And if you think that's culturally appropriate there, go and do that behaviour there.
You're sort of getting towards something that I've said recently, which is, you know, it's very difficult to suddenly go around, and I would hate to see this happen, some sort of, you know, disgusting Idi Amin policy where you go, all these people from this country, you now have to get out, we don't want you here anymore. It is non-discriminate, and it is a pretty vile way to go about running your business domestically. And so I think that one of the routes to sort of making sure that people who don't integrate decide they don't want to be here anymore is to say once and for all, we're putting a stop to all of these things which you regard as perks back at home but don't align with our cultural values. Would you agree, therefore, in order to maintain our sense of nationhood and the glue that binds us together, going as far as a government saying we're banning the burqa, we're not going to have hijabs at school, we're not going to provide translators, we're going to shut down faith schools and Islamic holiday camps, and while we're at it, guess what? You've got to stun your animals before slaughtering them. Are those the sort of things we should be looking into?
Well, I think there are individual cases to be made. So, for example, is halal slaughter cruel to the animal? Well, if it is, and we think that's a serious issue, then we should ban it, and we should ban it on that basis. I think the other issue you run into there is a lot of these people, as you say, with paid translators, they rely on the generosity of the state. They are basically able to live here because of the welfare state. If we change our rules so they're actually fair, so it requires people to work, and they actually have to live off the work that they do, I think we find that a lot of people who are a bad fit for this country would actually not have the finances to live here, and they would have to go somewhere else. You know, we can think about the fact that in London, nearly half of all people in London social housing were born overseas or headed up by someone who was born overseas. That's an insane number. we're subsidizing people to live here who in many cases aren't even working. So we should simply stop doing that.
And those symbols of multiculturalism that I mentioned before, things such as young girls being made to wear hijabs or women being forced to wear burqas, or perhaps they opt to wear them. I don't care either way. To me, it's a sign of oppression. And frankly, I think that we should be banning it as a result of making it a deterrent to say to people that sort of culture isn't our culture, so it's not welcome here. Should we be exploring that, or is actually wading into the realms of starting to dismantle the concept of multiculturalism a step too far?
Well, I think we should get rid of the concept of multiculturalism. It's not something that anybody particularly wants. It should be Britain's culture. On the other hand, I do think that liberty is important. I think if people want to wear a hijab, they should be allowed to. I think if they're wearing a full face covering, it's entirely within your rights to say, no, I'm not going to let you into my shop or my business or whatever else unless you take it off because I don't know who you are. And I think with schoolgirls especially, they should not be wearing a headscarf. Now, I mean, there's very little within Islam itself to say that they should be doing that. That is something that's being imposed here. Certainly children who are below puberty should not be wearing one, and that should just be banned in schools outright.
Good. I think we can sort of agree on that, actually, Guy. And let's get together and write a manifesto to save this nation. Senior researcher on nationhood at the Prosperity Institute, being very good to answer all of my pretty tough questions there.